Hello, everybody. I'm excited with the second season of CRO Talk Series. Thanks to M&M, Season 1 was a super success. For Season 2, we have attracted some of the industry stalwarts. In Season 1, we explored the role of the CRO. We looked at it from a different perspective, from an investor's perspective, from a CRO's perspective, from a CEO's perspective. In Season 2, we're going to do a little bit more deep dive. We're going to deep dive into the learnings from this industry stalwarts. Which are the things which worked very well for them? Which are the things which did not work, and why? If they can roll back the clock, the parts they would want to do differently, the parts they would not touch. It'll be a fascinating journey to speak to these thought leaders and hopefully direct towards a CRO playbook for CEOs and CROs and budding professionals.
Hi, Deep. I'm Simon Chassar. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Claroty, the leading cyber physical system security company. And I've been here for about 2 years. I'm based in the UK, a little bit cold at the moment, but it's a pleasure to be here. And thanks very much for inviting me.
So, Simon, maybe we can start off with a bit of knowing a bit about your journey, up to Claroty, and from there we can take it on, if it makes sense to you.
Yeah, sure, Deep. I mean, from my point of view, it depends how long you've got, but I think when I sort of entered into the tech world, I was entering in from business optimization for companies by being a sort of trained accountant, learning into technology. Companies were moving from manual accounting to technologies and really introduced into technology through that way. And with that, found a new sort of desire and interest, which drove me towards technology companies through the late 90s. I'd say that I went through multiple different American large tech vendors, being Cisco and being VMware and some others, and then found a sort of love for the smaller agile companies, startups, and got involved in that, moving from, I suppose, a commercial operations and commercial responsibility role into a field sales role. And then as I sort of moved through various sort of business optimization and companies that I was growing, especially on the startup side, I got an opportunity to join NTT and integrate several security companies that I'd acquired and divested. And that led me into the cybersecurity world about 4.5 years ago. And then found a love and passion for cybersecurity. So, those two things combined, technology and cybersecurity, really drove me over the last several years. And 2 years ago, an opportunity came up within a very interesting sector, which is around physical system security. And that includes everything from IoT, OT to IOMT, with a technology vendor called Claroty, who I'm at now. Because this is the new sort of extended threat surface that's now being connected as part of the digital transformation era. So, I found myself moving from a CRO cyber role at NTT to a CRO role in a hyper growth company at Claroty. So that's a little bit about me. I'm based in the UK, obviously, and global roles are always difficult, as you probably know. But obviously in the UK, from a time zone point of view, I can get up early and do Asia, and I can stay up late and do Americas. So it's a good location.
Yeah, that's true. London is anyway good for the financial services industry as well. Round the clock, it always helps to be in a centrally located. But interestingly, Simon, I think your career is very, very interesting in a sense that you started from the accounting side. I would say managing the internal customers to managing the actual customers of the organization. And I think that gives you, in a way, a pretty much of a holistic purview. And again, you straddle between, I would say, very large companies like Cisco, NTT, and things like that. At the same point of time, you've done your bit with the early stage startup, including now. I would say mid to early stage startups, including now. So that gives you a pretty much all aspects of the growth journey, right? Whether it's through M&A or because I think both NTT and Cisco had a lot of M&A led growth, and whereas maybe some of the other organization would have been more organic growth, because those are again different different, I would say, opportunities as well as challenges. How do you build a culture? How do you build a culture? How do you integrate everybody together and stay focused on the customer success?
Yeah, that's it. I think the interesting piece was, if I think about Cisco, it was a heavily inorganic growth driven business. Primarily my accounts were sort of the BT and AT&T and Ireland SP companies. But ultimately the dot-com burst happened as well, which then meant that we had to manage through a downturn.
Right.
And then ultimately back into a growth and a hyper growth with, I'd say, well, first before that, I'd say Avaya was one as well, where we were going through a lot of, I suppose, organizational change and inorganic adjustment, and then through to VMware, where it was all pure organic growth, market-driven hyper growth, which again it delivers different challenges, similar to what I'm seeing here at Claroty around dealing with hyper growth and scale on triple-digit sort of year-over-year growth. So there's those sort of challenges that you've got to think through the entire customer life cycle and services that are associated with the business. I mean, in terms of providing that value for the whole journey, and whether they're an early tech adopter or whether they're a late tech adopter, depending on which sort of organization you're in.
No, absolutely. And just speaking on that, Simon, it has to be a lot of intrinsic motivation, because it's not easy to make that transition from finance and accounting to really customer facing. I've seen people move from finance and accounting or legal to commercial roles, right? Which is more, let's say a chief commercial officer or deal kind of a person and things like that. But into a global leadership, business leadership, sales leadership, P&L leadership role is a complete, it has to be a lot of intrinsic motivation. So maybe if you don't mind asking me, what's been your personal motivation? I know you mentioned about being motivated towards tech and things like that, because I'm sure there would have been a lot of opportunities for you otherwise as well. So, taking that, being on the hot seat is not everybody's cup of tea.
I get a lot of coaching and mentoring that I do for salespeople, and one of the things that I say that the hardest bit, which you've got to sort of understand as a sales leader, is you go from the art of sales, right? In essence, how to deal with people, how to build trust, effectively how to gain relationships, and then manage different personalities and personas to get your outcome that you want. That's one sort of externally facing artistic skill that you need to have. And it either drives you as an individual and your personality, which it does for me. I love people. I love speaking to people and building friendships. And I think that suits well in a sales organization. One thing that when you move to sales leadership is that you've got to turn that art into a science. You've got to understand, how then the levers of an organization and all the factors that are associated with that process of a cycle of building trust and building relationships and building engagements with clients to ultimately get revenue are affected by those multiple levers. And you've got to also be in a personal circumstance where you've effectively done a lot of your earning out. So in essence, you've been carrying the bag, you've effectively been doing those, very significant commission checks through your life. And you get to a point where, from a monetary return point of view, you know that as you move into sales management and sales leadership, you're never going to get to those multiple accelerators that you would do within an individual contributor role. If you're comfortable with that, it's also about then giving back. So you then get into giving back and understanding how you take people on that same journey that you went through and giving them the guidance at the same time as you step into a different organization. It's not organization, but in different responsibility, where you're now a lot more of a custodian of the levers that are associated with the sales engagement. And if you're prepared to do that shift in your life and it excites you and you enjoy it, then that's a good step into sales leadership. The other factor is you push a lot of your monetary returns into more longer term returns, like equity returns, for example, rather than in-year commission checks. So it's a lot. You change your reward cycle from the here and now, where you love the thrill of the chase, getting the deal, getting the commission check, to seeing something grow and build and nurture and get those rewards over a longer cycle, and then you get your returns and rewards. So you've got to personally change your reward cycle into a longer extrinsic based driven model.
So clearly, obviously, in the leadership role, it is your reward cycle is more linked to the organization fortune and organization growth and organization profitability. No, I totally get it. I think the most important aspect which you covered was two things. Number one, obviously, you're ultimately in the business of managing people, coaching people, grooming people, in a way contributing back to those early career or mid career professionals who are going through this, who are going through their learning curve. That's number one. And personally, if you have not done that, you have not gone through that learning curve and got out of the mode of seeking instant gratification every quarter, every year, waiting for that commission check to happen. I guess I guess those are the two things I would say, your takeaway. But interestingly, Simon, you've done both large companies and early stage companies or mid stage companies. And what has been the difference in your experience of managing, whether it's a process or lack of process, or building teams, attracting talent, attracting customers? Because ultimately, the role of a leader would be to attract talent and attract customers and attract partners and build an ecosystem. So between a large company and, let's say, early stage or a mid stage company, what are the differences you've seen in your experience?
Well, I mean, listen, I think if I try and sum it up, I'd say when you get into a large organization, effectively there's a lot of established processes that have been built up over many years, but they're never perfect. Effectively, there are still gaps. And what you find is the gaps just become larger. And ultimately, those gaps need to be connected through either systems, but also people that effectively drive that end to end. And your ability to affect the outcome at a senior sales leadership perspective around any of the sales velocity formula. So if you think about the average selling price, for example, of a product, or effectively the win rate, or it could be the number of opportunities, or it could be the deal cycle. In a larger company, the ability to affect that at a lever level is much harder because you're dealing with multifaceted organization structures and huge gaps in the process, which are maybe connected by systems that you don't have the depth of to be able to understand. If I push on this lever, when do I actually see that change come back into the organization? So you've got to operate a lot ahead of the curve a lot more in a way. So you've got to be able to push on a lever to understand that effect is actually going to take me from an organizational change and systems and process, whatever it may be, a much longer period before you get the return. So you have to forward think and forward see what are the market movements that are going to occur, and ultimately build out scenarios for those market movements, and then make that adjustment now, gambling on effectively what is going to happen at 1 year's time, to be able to see those returns in terms of win rates and ASPs and so on. In a smaller company, what you'll find is, especially in a hyper-growth company or a startup company, less processes. Now, I'm not saying that they're end-to-end in any way. There's still gaps, but the gaps are much smaller. The gaps between the process can be fixed really quickly with either people or tools, multiple tools, or whatever it may be. And your ability to effectively react with any of those sales velocity drivers, for example, is much faster. So you don't need to be so forward leaning in terms of 1-2 years out around the effect and returns. You can take a much more tactical approach to the response you need to make to the market, which means that you're agile. The thing is with an agility model, you've got to have the right people around you within the organization that can effectively adjust to that agility, because not everyone likes change. And you've got to be able to have people that want to embrace change, can see through problems and effectively respond to them in a fast way. And that's probably the two high-level scenarios, I'd say, of an organizational size and growth. Everything always comes down to the people, no matter what. If you haven't got the right people in your organization, you won't be able to deliver. And if you don't treat it like a family, you're never really going to get the outcomes that you expect. In bigger organizations, I've had large teams, 400 or so people, 450 people working for me. really difficult to understand everyone and know everyone who's really performing. Obviously, smaller teams, you've got 30, 40 people, you know exactly how they who they are. I'm somewhere in the middle of around 200 at the moment, which is good. It's sort of close enough to be at a Series E level, with the right people. But we're getting to that point now of putting in the spanner controls and putting the extra layers of management in. So it won't be long before I sort of lose the touch of, have we got the right people that can really be agile in the organization? But I trust in my leaders, and it's always important you bring the right people into the organization to go on that journey with you.
No, very interesting. Very interesting. And obviously scale also matters, and how you scale and your process maturity from that perspective. So, Simon, speaking about the process, and speaking about our topic of the podcast on the CRO series, right, how do you see the role of the CRO, or what has changed? Let's say, in the good old days, we used to sell products. We used to do the product kind of a thing, right? And there used to be SVP of sales, head of sales, and things like that. Whereas, I can't help myself ask this question, given that it's a CRO series podcast. So I thought I'll check your perspective, because you have seen the journey, right? You have seen the journey all across. So, from a process perspective, from a role perspective, how do you see this this CRO role from a head of sales, head of marketing, head of customer success, things like that?
Yeah, I'd say head of sales, for example, or any sort of, VP sales, SVP sales, whatever it may be, you're very much one-dimensionally focused on the output, right? The outcome, the external face of the organization, and whether it's the sales, the partners, or vendors support, whatever it may be, customer success and so on. As you become into organizations that have the maturity to have a revenue officer, there's a split in that responsibility to have not just a focus externally to ensure that you're delivering the right market strategy, the right go-to-market strategy and execution, but you also need to take into account all of the other organizational pillars that support it, and how your business affects them and how their business affects you. So if you think about TSIA, that sort of says the sort of perfect sort of structure organization is sort of the build, sell, deliver. Build, you have a product or a technical officer. Effectively sell, you have a CRO or a CSO, and deliver, you have a COO, for example, for the delivery. And then embraced across the top of that is obviously your marketing message and how you go to market and everything else.
Yeah.
The CRO role effectively is to interconnect. What do we need to build for the product perspective with the roadmap, and what we need to create to make it ability to sell any enhancements or features? So you're interacting a lot with the product organization to ensure you've got the right product market fit, for example, for your ICP. From a delivery point of view, you don't want to sort of create an output on the delivery organization that creates a problem where it's unable to deliver. So effectively affects your customer satisfaction, that then affects your churn, that then affects your upsell. So you're then interfacing between that sort of build and deliver. At the same time, you need to make sure that you're interfacing with your marketing, because the top of the funnel feed and your demand generation has got to stay ahead of the curve in terms of your pipeline yield, to ensure that as you're sort of growing and executing, you've got the right conversion rates, you've got the right market attractiveness, you've got all the areas, whether it be direct or indirect, marketing point of view, PR, branding, and other demand generation inbound that's coming in from websites and events. And the challenge is making sure that you've got that as a business partner, because you need to share where the movements are happening in the market into marketing for them to be able to then plan and respond to it, to ensure that you're getting the pipeline for the deal cycles that you've got, right? Then you also got to make sure you've got the pipeline there for any additional spanner control or scale add-ons, because you don't want to just go get headcount and staff of pipeline. You've got to make sure that you bring in people that, especially want to get the best talent into the organization.
Right.
They want to come in knowing that there's an opportunity to earn, $500,000 paychecks, for example. So you've got to have the pipeline ready for them. You've got to show them that there's an opportunity that they can get that. You've got to keep everyone happy internally too. So you can't just, you've got to deal with the earnouts and the account splits and everything else as you're growing and scaling. So there's a lot of that downward as well as upward and cross functional responsibility. And then you've got to deliver that sort of confidence, not just to the executives of your customers, not to the executives of your partners, but also to the executives of the board, making sure that they know that your go-to-market plans and the business plans are supported by the CFO. The CFO interactions are important, making sure you're giving the right margin contributions, cash flow contributions, you're not making negative impact. So the role of the CRO has changed to be a multifaceted, interdependent, departmental, there's a lot of words there, orchestrator, I'd say.
Absolutely. Yeah, and also to your point, Simon, from a customer's point of view, instead of going to multiple points within the organization at the organization scales, CRO could be whether it is some sticky issues related to the product or the renewals or any of the other issues or adoption or things like that, could be a single point of contact, being channeled to the various parts of the organization also. So that's true. So maybe I'll switch gear a little bit. Obviously, cybersecurity has been in the headlines. Obviously, more recently, last 12 months. So in a way, you have a tailwind from the organization perspective, and we did discuss a little bit about that. But before we get to that, number one, how do you see the cybersecurity space evolving? And where does Claroty play a role there? What's your customer value proposition, and how do you differentiate yourself compared to, because the market is filled with many players? So maybe a broader aspect, then come into specific to Claroty.
Yeah, sure. A lot of questions to unpack from that. So let me start with cybersecurity industry. Great tailwind, obviously driven by malactors that are effectively making a shift from, if you think about what happened with the IT security market, malactors were stealing personal records for financial gain. They used to have a great value on the market where you get your credit card, PCI data, PII data, etc., and get a great return for thousands and thousands of records. Over time, that has created a knock-on effect by regulation and compliance. It's also driven innovation in security control technologies to respond and counter that. So IT security has effectively been evolving over the last 10 years and has now come to a point where, if you think about any other traditional product, effectively it's come commoditized. There's enough regulatory reinforcement around it. There's enough sort of technology players within the security controls areas. And effectively, the malactors are not getting the same level of financial rewards that they used to get around personal data. So now we've got a general shift in terms of digital transformation where we as consumers want things faster, sooner, and manufacturers are having to produce goods just in time, pull in parts. There's an interconnected manufacturing and critical infrastructure supply chain that is multinational, global in a way. This connected environment of physical systems to drive innovation, right, in a way, and drive acceleration in automation or eco-efficiency has also created now a new attack surface, because this environment is not the same as IT. It has different protocols that are, in lots of cases, very old, right? They've been around, built to last for 20 to 30 years. And ultimately, these are now exploit areas. So the malactors have shifted from personal data to business availability as a ransom, as a financial gain. Because they know that if they shut down the production of tires at Bridgestone or Colonial Pipeline gas, for example, the reaction massive, huge, right? Revenue, people, everything, consumers. So they can ask for a better financial return. So that's where they focus their attention. So this particular area is called cyber physical systems, and it includes all of those physical devices like IoT devices and operational technology devices, even medical devices like MRI machines and blood analyzing machines, all the way through to building systems like HVACs or lighting systems, which are all now networked. So Claroty's value prop is that we are the leading cybersecurity technology company for all of those areas and arenas in the physical system world. The physical world we protect. And ultimately, this new world, there's actually not a lot of competition in this space. There are an increase in volume of malactors exploiting it, like for serious financial gains. There's now an acceleration of regulation, and there's now an acceleration of innovation in this space, in this particular space where we operate. So that all coming together means that I've got a tailwind of opportunity as large organizations at the board level, because they're concerned about business continuity, are making this a top priority. You know, we cannot have our, and I'm just paraphrasing, but we cannot have our operations plant in this country shut down, because if we do, within 5 days, we've lost X amount of revenue, and we've probably lost our supply chain, and we've probably lost our distribution network, and we've probably lost our customers. Therefore, there's a real risk that business goes, goes under or goes out of business. So with that, that means that I've got a good tailwind in terms of the number of opportunities. I still have to go through the process of influencing and convincing and demonstrating value for our customers of our technology and how it solves their outcomes that they need to in terms of uptime of their business. But our value proposition is, you know, you can't protect what you can't see. We give you full visibility to all the physical assets. Our deep domain expertise that we've got over, you know, we've got over 800 customers worldwide, all of the top, you know, brands across multiple manufacturing and critical infrastructure and healthcare organizations, for example, means that we have the ability to understand every protocol within that environment, so we can show you the vulnerability that you've got. And you can go from an inherent risk down to a residual risk you're comfortable with. And we'll connect all of those threats and alerts into your existing security controls systems and service providers, partners, and so on. So we have a quite unique value prop and a great tailwind to continue to deliver hyper growth off of.
And so, and I think it is a pretty impactful area, because obviously, you know, physical systems is not just of the business benefit or the business loss of the organization. Let's say if you hack into a grid, electricity grid, or a gas grid, or, you know, and we have seen incidents, you know, across last couple of years where things have gone down and things like that. It's also a national security thing for many countries, right? It is not just about the organization aspect. It is also about countries' own defense mechanisms and things like that, right? Ability to protect your networks, ability to protect your assets, critical assets. Well, let's say if it's a refining or it's a generation or a healthcare is even more critical, right? So given that, it's obviously a very, very important aspect of that. But as you rightly said, that there's obviously still, I would say, in the early stage of adoption, awareness and adoption and things like that, right? Because if you look at manufacturing or distribution and things like that, world is also going through a lot of disruption in supply chain, in logistics, in many other challenges. So, you know, in terms of driving some of these agenda with your clients, right? Does this distraction, because I'm actually moving forward, trying to look forward in, let's say, for next year. What's the outlook? What do you see your customers are saying in terms of the outlook, and how, you know, what are your going to be your growth strategies, or, you know, at a high level, what are your growth strategies, and what are your barriers to growth?
Yeah, I think that there's obviously a lot of headwinds in terms of what's happening in 23. There's a sort of geopolitical issue that's affecting energy prices, which is having a knock-on effect in terms of supply, you know, core products, but also from you know, general energy, which is driving up inflationary pressures on businesses. And you know, when you've got an interconnected supply chain of manufacturing or critical infrastructure, it has a compounding effect, because not only have you got an inflationary pressure on, you know, cost of living, which ultimately drives up wages, but you've also got that inflationary pressure on the cost of fuel, the cost of goods, the cost of parts from a supply chain and technical component perspective, which means that just to get your sort of goods, your raw material goods in, the price has gone up significantly. That is compounded across multiple layers because you've got multiple layers in your supply chain. Then your own production costs, for example, have also gone up. So that compounding effect of those inflationary pressures all coming together in a global supply chain means that the net result is there's a significant inflationary impact. So those headwinds, plus you've got from a financial markets point of view, you've got a lot of FX currency variations, which is impacting a lot of countries actually, especially Asia. And I'd say those headwinds I'm conscious of. We obviously still remain a priority within our customers, because if we didn't have any revenue coming in, it's the worst of the worst. You've got all those sort of in costs, and you've got no revenue. That's certain death. So that it's still a priority to maintain that business continuity. What I see happening more and more is a shift more towards acceleration and driving automation, where they can eliminate costs and ultimately rationalizing in other areas of expense where maybe the risks, they don't need to have such a high level of residual risk or a lower level of residual risk, so to speak. So they're diverting some of that IT security spend that they've been doing for many years, moving it into OT or in IoT, for example, to drive automation, but also to drive protection of the business continuity. And at the same time, trying to figure out, okay, well, where do I, really live with what risk? The residual risk. I need to get from here inherent risk in my business. How do I get to a level of residual risk I'm comfortable with for our business? So they're doing a lot of that prioritization. I'd see also that, a lot of technology leaders in our customer base are using this as an opportunity to get rid of the technical debt that's been built up over multiple years that got compounded through COVID. So you've got, if you think about it, a lot of budget squeeze that happened during COVID because of lockdown, where they may have been planning to do large network and large technology refreshes or whatever it may be to get rid of some of the technical legacy stuff. Obviously, that was put on hold. They then sort of brought that back post-COVID in a way to address that now. And now they're in a cost inflation pressure point where they're going, okay, well, what's a completely different strategy? And i.e., do I go to cloud? Do I use cloud as a way of moving away from that technology debt and adopt and embracing that to deal with two things? One, the cost pressures and the technology debt. And I'm seeing a lot more of a focus and shift towards cloud to address that. So part of my growth strategy is obviously to ensure that we have a solution that's SaaS-based, cloud-based, cloud-friendly, nations and so on. Obviously, internally, I'm looking at things like the sales cycles, because they're lengthening as decision maker sign-off has gone higher in the organization. How do I prove the value faster? How do I take some of those challenges out the customers from an awareness to an adoption stage, make it easy for the customers in a way as much as possible? Things like payment terms and other things like that are supporting those things to shorten the sales cycle. So, I'll pause there because I was talking a lot. So, Deep, what have you got?
No, I think that's a very interesting point, and I think you've covered most of the key aspects. One is obviously because of the situation, the global geopolitical situation, and not just in Europe, across the world. I guess even in Asia and things like that, given the geopolitical situation, and obviously there's a lot of instability in the supply chain, hence leading to inflationary kind of a thing. And also there was an imbalance during the COVID last 2.5 years, especially for physical infrastructure. There's a lot of pent-up demand. At the same point of time, there's a rebalancing kind of a thing. There's a cautionary headwind given where the prices are going up and things like that. So it's a difficult balancing act. And obviously, from your role perspective, from an organization perspective, how do you still drive the growth? How do you still get to the top of your customer value proposition? And because this is something which is a business continuity. I think you said it rightly. It is a business continuity issue. It is not just about good to have a technology refresh, which I can push it back by a couple of years. Because in such a situation, if your business gets hijacked or malware attack happens, which we have seen increasingly happening, right? And your business can stop, basically, and you can get hijacked in a way. So how do you bring it to on the priority list? So my question as a follow-up to that is, if you have to look at your growth strategy or your GTM strategy, right, go-to-market strategy, is there anything you need to be doing differently in going ahead, given this, both the headwind and the tailwind which you're facing in your industry, in your organization? So is there any thing on the go-to-market which you need to do differently? That's number one. And number two, because obviously you're still a pre-IPO company, there will be a lot of talk around, how do you keep increasing your TAM, right? Addressable market and things like that, because it is also about expansion, right? So some of these opportunities is how you continue to increase your TAM, both from a geographical expansion as well as a product expansion perspective. So, I'd be keen to understand separately, what are the strategies you're doing to try and look at the TAM aspect of it, TAM expansion, and number two, obviously, on the go-to-market side of it, but the execution or prosecution of those opportunities.
Let me answer it with just a pre-part of the answer. So most organizations that are startups go through what I'd say summarize as 3 Ps. First P is effectively penetration. You sell something into the market that whatever someone will pay for it, to whoever will buy it.
Yeah.
You then go through a second phase where you move into protection phase, where you effectively start to build up your go-to-market ecosystem, channel partners, structure, pricing, packaging, features, etc. You then start to really, drive down on your ICP and your TAM. Okay. Yeah. Then effectively your last stage in a way is your proliferation stage, which is really how do you sort of drive the proliferation of others selling for you, allowing them to drive identification of opportunities for you, enabling them to do that. And then also you move through phases of like, how do they influence, how do they convince, effectively, how do others sell for you, right, effectively. So in essence, the growth strategy that we're on at the moment is really through those latter stage of protection and basically into the proliferation stage. So building greater alliances is part of our strategy next year from the IT security control market, making sure that we've got something that has a harmonious fit within the customer strategy so that they don't feel like they're taking on more technology debt. This is something which is seamless within an interface. It makes it easy for them. From a channel point of view, making sure that they have got the right education, certifications, and enablement so that they can identify opportunities and effectively influence those opportunities. That means that others are driving sales processes for us without my own resources having to drive that from a high touch point of view. And the other piece I'd say is that as I look at then what the features and functionalities that we require for ensuring that we've got the right addressable market, we have constantly built up effectively the protocol libraries and the vulnerabilities for all of those physical assets, which means that our addressable market is now, across multiple verticals, and whether that's automotive, food and beverage, critical infrastructure, oil, gas, electrical, water utilities, life sciences, hospitals, you name it, it's pretty broad. And making sure that we effectively focus in the right areas is one piece. But to ensure that we get the right volume of opportunities, it's all about that awareness, as you say. So if I think about the brand awareness and the outcome that we deliver, leveraging our alliances, leveraging our partnerships, and leveraging our message to market and our thought leadership, we will influence the volume of opportunities, because ultimately this is something which is not going away. Threat actors are constantly increasing their volume of attacks, and therefore that number of customers and entities that are looking for a solution to protect themselves and their revenue is also going up. What I need them to do is I need them to find us, because we've got an outcome. As long as I make it easy to ensure that it fits into their strategy, then effectively that's how I deal with the growth strategy. Beyond the basic, sales capacity planning, number of people, resources, SPs, just taking the straight, high level message of it for you, Deep, as much as I can,
of course,
and just looking it through the sales velocity formula that supports it. How can I ensure that I get the sales cycles as efficient as possible that add value, where I can basically grow the deal sizes by creating the right alliances and the right interfaces and the right product feature expansions that we've got in the product development. And then ultimately, how do I ensure that I deliver value to our clients through those engagements and partnerships, which improves my win rate and conversion rates? And I've got the right people with me on this journey. We've got the right teams behind me. So that's a high level for you, Deep.
No, that's perfect. And I love the 3 P's. You talked about penetration, proliferation, and I missed the third one.
Penetration, protection, and proliferation.
Proliferation. Yeah, got it. Yeah, and that's why your GTM strategy is. How do you get your ecosystem to do the selling and the identification for you? And because end of the day, it's also about the execution. Because in your customer premise, and talking technologically, it'll be a hybrid environment. It will not be a cloud environment only, right? You will have physical and on cloud kind of infrastructure on the customer side also. How do you ensure that that is protected? So no, that's pretty very, very interesting. So and what about just a quick one in terms of the proliferation? Because again, there are two ways you do the proliferation. I'm going a little specific. One is expanding your existing customers. Other is going after net new customers. I'm sure both are the driving factors for your growth.
Yes. So we have a very balanced sort of upsell as well as a balanced net new target acquisition target. At the moment, we've got a very high volume of net new client acquisitions. Making sure I have the right percentage balance that's also driven through within my team's leadership around what volume we need. There's also incentives on the sales team to ensure they upsell and expand within their existing base on the customer success side, and ultimately on the net new team effectively acquire new targets. So going deeper and wider in our existing base with our product sets, capabilities, and the volume of plants or facilities or sites that they have.
Right.
And at the same time, driving a net new client acquisition volume as well. So we have a very balanced net new and upsell focus, and ensure that we don't have any churn, right? So we don't have any churn. Means we don't have holes in our bucket. So there's a renewal strategy too.
Yeah, because I was coming to that because that's a closed loop cycle in a way. That's where your entire customer success, how do you ensure adoption? One is to sell, the sales team would sell. How do you ensure that it gets adopted? And, the word of mouth goes, the customer advocacy happens because that fuels your, net new acquisition at the same point of time, expansion in the existing customers. So, and your renewals and things like that, given your model is SaaS and cloud-based.
That's it. There's the net new, obviously there's the net new ARR targets.
Of course.
There's the net recurring revenue targets, which is sort of the up pieces. And then obviously you've got your pure renewal churn targets.
Perfect. Simon, thank you for being with us today. This is the first recording of the season 2. I'm sure you would have heard a little bit about the season 1 of the CRO Talk Series. Our idea, as I mentioned, is to get different CROs from various industries, various parts of the world, to share their thoughts, to share their insights, and build a community of CROs where we can add to the thinking, we can add to what's going on in the world, and we can create some amount of awareness as we move towards a subscription-based economy.
Thank you, Deep, for the conversation today. I could talk to you for hours. I appreciate it. It's been very interesting. Obviously, I hope the listeners find it interesting, and they're more than welcome to connect and explore more with me offline and separately. So thanks very much. I'm looking forward to the next series of the CRO Talks.
Thank you, Simon. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really enjoyed our conversation. and it was very insightful. I learned a few things, and I'll possibly apply them in the right context. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.